everyone, welcome. Sorry if I've butted into people's conversations, you can carry on with them afterwards. We just want to make sure we start because there's another workshop in here afterwards, so if we go over we will miss some of our information and content. So great, welcome. We're going to introduce ourselves. So I'm Rachel, I work for the Diocese as Young Leaders Community Enabler, and it's great to be here with...
I'm Susannah, I go to All Saints Ecclesall, and the main ways that I've been involved in leadership are diocese events and leading and preaching in church.
Hello, my name's Justin. I help out with the community kitchen on a Thursday, and I do chalice bearing and the reading sometimes at my church.
So today's workshop is about young people in leadership. So we're going to start by talking about how a church's culture can affect how easy it is for young people to be leaders. Then we're going to give you some practical tips about getting young people involved in leadership. And at the end, we'll have an opportunity to ask any questions you might have about young leadership or the young leaders community.
Great. So we're going to start with looking at the culture of our contexts and how that makes it easy or less easy for children and young people to be involved. So I've got a question.
I'd like you all to discuss what about a church's culture can make it more or less easy for children and young people to be involved.
So just feel free to shout anything out or chat amongst yourselves.
If the youth takes place in church, because like some people have it in a separate building and stuff like that, so they don't actually cross paths with the main congregation.
Yeah.
Does that make it more or less easy?
I was thinking less easy.
Yeah.
Having it less easy in a separate room and less easy in another.
That it's less easy for them to be involved if they're in a separate building.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I guess it's if someone's been pushed and quietened, even when they're younger, and it's once one idea is hushed and quietened, it can be hard to then say, by the way, we want to hear everyone's ideas, but you've already, the ideas don't always come at the nice tidy council moments that you want, so to actually make sure as many people as possible at church are open to listening, not just the children and youth volunteers, that everyone is willing to be a big ear.
A big ear.
A big ear, yeah.
I like
that just came out of my mouth.
No, I like that.
Because actually you do have to sometimes listen to the smaller details. Sometimes ideas come in ways that you don't even know it's an idea. It's just as something has been said and you go, what do you know, those whats and whys that you have to then dig a bit.
Welcome.
Hello.
Hello, I don't know if I'm
I don't think you're alright, you're fine.
Yeah. We're just discussing what about church culture makes it more or less easier for children to be involved. So feel free to shout out any tidbits you may have.
Sometimes in the church that I'm in, we get the young people doing a job, like a projector, or if they're musically talented, they could do that, or even, I don't know, just being someone welcoming when people arrive. And even though it's something only small and not kind of like, it's not like the whole service hangs in the balance of that particular job, but it gives them kind of that little bit of responsibility.
I think that's great, but also but the other side of that, not saying about where you are, but the number of young people who I speak to who said as soon as they walk into church, somebody says, do you want to go on the tech team? So that's in the value as well, isn't it? Like, so
I'm a pastor's kid, so I just had to do everything.
kind of.
I church with Sam, you know, just
I think that's
he's doing, figure it
an
out.
interesting point though, because I think often like younger people in church get asked to do stuff like that because we assume that they know about it, or we assume their interests without getting to know them, or asking them like, actually, what is it that you enjoy doing, or what is it that you're good at, or what do you want to be involved with, or do you want to be involved with anything?
And the other one is, I think you should be a pastor. A lot of, like, my son had this just because he was always kind of keen and enthusiastic. He just was assumed that he would take like a ministry. And like, he's 25 now, so he's not a young person. But it still kind of goes back to it, and I'm like saying, you just got to put your whole child aside, and all those people when you were young who said to you, maybe you should go and get ordained, you just got to just put that aside. You've got to kind of really think about it.
Well, then you want what not everybody else wants.
What maybe God's saying. So those are the two things I was thinking. You're on the tech team, and then you should be a pastor.
I think it's important that the leadership of the church have a real vision for how young people can be involved, and not just like a token way as well. I think it needs to be kind of part of the kind of, I guess, the team, you know, in terms of just seeing as part of the family and having their say in how church is shaped, and actually having a vision of what young people can do. So, like, you know, not every young person will want to preach or lead, but there's some people who will. I mean, like you guys have mentioned, and I think that's amazing to give opportunities like that. Not every church will do that.
Great. Anyone else got any thoughts about culture?
I think giving them space, like I started a few months ago at the church where I am now, and one of the young people is like the son of who kind of does the tech team and stuff, so he's in quite early. So I'd be setting up and he'd always be in the room, and at the beginning I didn't really clock that he's kind of wanting to help, but then when I'd clocked it, like he sets and helps me set up every morning, and it's such a massive help. Like, yeah, so just give them space to be able to offer to do things, I think.
Cool. I'm going to ask you guys, as young leaders then, how can churches, what sort of church would help you feel like you belong as a leader? So there's kind of, what about our church's cultures would make you feel more like you want to lead?
So my church likes to start from a very young age. So when an adult is on some sort of rota, like on technology or reading or intercessions, they can bring their children with them to do that. So that was really helpful. So for example, my brother has been doing the technology with my dad since he was about 8, and I've been doing the reading and intercessions with my mum. So it's a great way to practice for young people so that they can do it on their own when they're older. Another opportunity that we have is something called action songs. So it's songs with a sort of dance routine that's loosely based off of sign language, and we get the young children to like go up on the stage and lead the actions for the church, and they can bring their parents and carers up with them so that they feel comfortable doing it. It gives them an opportunity to lead in front of the church. Another opportunity that I've had in my church is work experience. So last summer I shadowed my children's minister for 2 weeks, and that was right before she left to go and do a different job, and we had Holiday Club coming up, so that gave me an opportunity to become more involved in the leadership with Holiday Club because I'd spent those 2 weeks preparing for it. Another thing that's really important about a church's culture is the other people in the church. So like the congregation, it really helps if they're encouraging and supportive of young people, and also like the leaders in the church setting a good example of what a leader should look like for the young people. Obviously they might feel a bit concerned about young people being involved in leadership because we don't really know what we're doing, but it's important that we have that chance to experience and practice leadership. So what are we doing? So what would I like to see in churches? Ideally young people doing everything, but you know, adults exist as well. So my church has something called a youth service once a month at the evening service, which is where we basically hand the service over to the teenagers, so they're leading, preaching, doing the music and doing all the behind the scenes stuff as well. So that's a great way for the youth to use their own individual talents and not just what adults think they'd be good at. So I'd like to see more of those in other churches, but also I think that just generally youth on more rotas within normal church services, and for teenagers to be involved in church as any other adult would be.
What about you, Justin?
My church has provided a very supportive community that's had such an impact on me that I wouldn't be the person I am today without them. My church is inclusive and doesn't mind noise from babies and young children. My church also believes in Messy Church, which is where there are art services and Sunday school for children to learn about God and the work He does in a way that they can understand at such a young age. Youth groups provide lots of laughs and help to further my journey through Christianity while also guiding it. And just for those of you who don't know, ARC is a wonderful opportunity for children to do creative activities like painting, origami and other arts and crafts. And church and youth groups are already really good and I enjoy them a lot. The talks in my church are full of energy, prayers feel almost magical, and the music just creates a nice environment to worship God in.
I think those key things about like being the kind of church that you're part of has helped you to feel like you're able to lead. Would you say, I don't want to put words into your mouths, but would you feel like kind of where you are and what it's like has helped you to feel like you can step up and do things in your church? I think like those things are really key, and actually I've been to all sorts of different churches. I only recently moved to Sheffield from Bristol, so me and my husband went around loads of churches to find out like where we wanted to be and what it was like, and the cultures across churches can be completely different. Some feel really kind of easy for children and young people to get involved, they feel really welcoming, and some maybe less so. And I think that sometimes in our churches it can feel like I really want to do this, I really want to raise up children and young people to lead, but just I don't really know where to start because the culture is really stopping us from being able to do that. So I'm just going to give some kind of quick ideas on what areas of our church life we could have an influence on, how we can influence our culture. I know most of us here probably don't have the power to make big decisions about what happens in our church or how the church is led, but actually we all have opportunities to speak up for children and young people, to create opportunities. So I would love to just kind of give some thoughts about how we could do that in our churches. And by the way, if anyone wants to ask any questions of any of us, like these guys are an amazing resource because they are young leaders actually on the ground. So if at any point you want to ask a question, please go ahead. Yeah.
I was just more of a curiosity, as you guys, those points you made were brilliant. You know, if you swap churches, the approaches have worked, do you think? Or do you think it's about finding the right church for you? You know, like you said about the different kinds of activities, because actually the thought of, I know my kids, if I'd have made them come up with me to lead things, they'd have hated it. But equally I accept that it works for some. I just wondered how you two felt if you like had swapped experiences. Do you think it would have been the same?
It depends. Like, I think it's more about you being comfortable leading in your own church. So like if you know people there and you know the congregation, that really helps. Obviously more churches will be more open to certain things, and I think we've both been very blessed with the opportunity to lead. But yeah, I think it is more just about the young people being confident themselves, because realistically you can make it work in some way, whether that be just like behind the scenes stuff or leading on the stage. There can be a way for young people to lead in a church.
So some thoughts about what we could do, as I'm assuming we're all adults here. I'm not going to make the assumption that as adult leaders actually we have the power maybe that some children and young people don't have in our churches, which is a shame, but we do have opportunities. And some of these won't be relevant for everybody, but I've just got a couple of points to go, well, about 4 points to suggest to you. So if you're involved in any meetings, if you ever have any opportunities, I've sat through some boring PCC meetings and some boring church staff meetings where you just feel like everyone's just yammering on about something that isn't really important. And sometimes there isn't an opportunity, but do you ever have opportunities to bring up children and young people in meetings if you're ever involved in meetings? And if something is being discussed, how are you thinking about how children and young people could be brought into that conversation, whether that is if you're discussing kind of changing music styles or something that's happening, an event that's happening in the church, whether that's changes to buildings or services. Do you have an opportunity to bring in the thoughts of children and young people? Do you have an opportunity to ask the question, how is this going to impact children and young people in our church? And it could be a good opportunity to ask, how are we listening to the voices of children and young people in these meetings that we're having? I know that, I know that sometimes we say we really care about children and young people, we want to raise up young leaders, but sometimes we talk more about them than we ask questions of them, and they have an awful lot of things to say about what is important to them, and I think it's really important to be listening to those things. And equally, do you have opportunities to speak to children and young people in your context? Do you have opportunities to ask them what they're interested in, what they think is important in the life of the church that could then be brought into agendas for meetings and things that are made? Now, I'm aware that not everyone will be part of these kind of meetings, but I think it's important to kind of take the spirit of that where you have the opportunity, where are you bringing children and young people into the conversation? The second question that I want to ask is actually, how do you interact with the children and young people in your church? Lots of us do interact with children and young people in our churches already because it's our job, and that's great. But sometimes it's very easy to get caught up, I know, in kind of coffee after services or things like that. We want to chat to our friends, or we're being pulled aside by parents to ask us questions, and it can be really hard to actually intentionally speak to children and young people. But I think it's really important to form those intergenerational relationships, because it shows us that we're not the most important people in the room, but it also shows children and young people that actually they are important as well. Someone wants to chat to them. It's not just the other children or young people chatting to them. It's an adult chats to me. I'm part of the community. I'm not just a child on the edge. They're part of a whole family. We're all part of a whole family. So could you intentionally speak to children and young people, if you don't already, during coffee, after the service, at intergenerational church events, if you have things like that? And you might be thinking, well, kids find that weird. Yeah, sometimes young people find it weird if you just go up to them and say hi. That's okay, like, push past the weirdness. Just because it's weird doesn't mean it's bad. Obviously, there are some things to be, like, there's safeguarding considerations. Don't add them on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Don't ask for children and young people's phone numbers. But actually having friendships and relationships is really important, so that we can get to know children and young people in our churches. My third kind of thought is actually, do you use the opportunities that you have to lead to raise up young leaders? If you're asked to give prayers in a service or to read a Bible reading, do you ever invite a child or a young person into that opportunity? How could you invite a child or a young person to be involved in that opportunity? Some of us maybe already do that. If you've got children, it's often quite easy to kind of invite them into that, but not all of us do. But actually, where could you use an opportunity that you have to lead to invite a child or a young person to lead? And finally, just a quick thought is, do you actually have a vision for this? Have you thought about what's important about young leadership? I think these guys have both said some great things about why it's important, and you might get something to say from what they're going to say in a little bit, but actually, do you have a reason, and can you pull that little vision statement out of your pocket? So when I was a young person, I remember doing a session on sharing your testimony. It's a little bit cringe thinking about it now, but we were told, like, prepare a quick testimony that you can say at any moment when someone asks you your reason for believing in Jesus, and you're going to pull that out of your pocket and you're going to tell them, this happened to me when I was young and I had this. Yeah, anyway, I didn't have a crazy story about how I was converted to Christianity, but actually I think it's a helpful kind of idea to have something that you can just pull out of your pocket. You could write it down, you don't have to write it down, but just to kind of think over, why is it important for children and young people to lead, and why do you think it's important, and could you share that? How could you share that with people who ask you? If you're ever in a situation where you're having a chat with someone and you mention something about children and young people, or someone asks a question, how could you have something really quick and simple to say that actually puts across that vision for why it's important for children and young people to lead? So that is just a few kind of quick thoughts, the kind of opportunities to influence, interacting with children and young people, using the opportunities that you have to lead, and thinking about how you're going to share with other people what's important about children and young people leading. But actually, as I said, it's so important to be listening to the voices of children and young people, and I've just talked for about 5 minutes, and I hope that some of that was helpful, but actually I want to ask our young leaders, what would help you? Like, what would help you to lead? What would you like leaders to know about young people when it comes to helping you lead? And what would you like kind of leaders to be saying in meetings or in decision-making situations? What would you like people to be saying about young people in those contexts?
I think a lot of young people see leadership as just responsibilities, and well, that is an aspect of leadership. True leadership is about getting people's voices and opinions heard, and youth don't often understand this. And I believe that the voices of young people are important because adults can only understand their perspectives to a point, and young people can present a different side to a story that adults can never truly grasp. And it's important to give young people opportunity to lead because it can help them develop as people, like it has for me, and it can make them feel like they're really making a difference.
I think the most important part is just not to make assumptions about young people. Don't assume that certain people will want to lead or won't want to lead, and don't assume that people will want to lead in a certain way. Lots of people have secret gifts and talents that you might not know about, and just because they don't look like what you'd expect a typical leader to look like, or they don't act like that, it doesn't mean that they don't have a way that they can contribute. And also, as Rachel said earlier, it's really important for young people to have older role models. So I think that it's great when young people can get involved in intergenerational events. So one thing that would be really helpful is if you invite the older members of the youth maybe to men's and women's events, so that they can basically just get treated like an adult and learn how to deal with Christian life as an adult, because in a few years they're going to be facing the same challenges that adults will be facing, and it helps to prepare them for the future.
Great. That's really helpful. Does anyone have any questions about what Susannah and Justin said? Or anything else, or you just have something that you want to say? Unless it's rude and disrespectful, don't do that.
I think it's so great, Susannah, that you said about leadership, like looking a bit different as well, and not kind of having a role. Because sometimes we can have a role, we're like, oh, we need a young person to do this. Let's go find a young person to fit in that role. But actually spending that time getting to know that young person and giving them the opportunities of like, what can we do? How can we shape this service or this event so that you can be a part of it? I think that's really important. So thank you for sharing that.
So can I make a suggestion that struck me about talking about sharing young people's opinions and voices, not just like in the role. When I think about other ways of doing that. Because that's not just even the same as having a role of leading liturgy and prayers and stuff, is it? Or leading worship, that's kind of a role. Yes, so how do you
That's a very good question.
Well, just my initial thoughts when you talked before, I've just jotted down, like, I need to do an AGM report, so I've said, well, I'm going to get them involved in writing the children's department AGM report. And then I suddenly also thought, we could gather together some questions for the young people to raise at the AGM. So just those, you know, you've got any thoughts on that?
Let's just ask the young people how they want to be involved in leadership and what opportunities they'd like to see in church.
Yeah, kind of just what Susannah said. Like, ask and make sure you're saying, like, it's like, how do you feel about this? And instead of just saying like, we're doing this, are you happy about that? Say like, would you like to do this?
I think sometimes it can be really hard in kind of contexts like that, like with things like AGMs or like, you know, some churches have PCCs or, you know, committees that decide things, because often children and young people don't know how it works. A lot of just standard lay people don't know how church decisions are made, do they? So I think that there's something in kind of how are we communicating the process to people in our churches, whether that's young people, about how the system actually works, because I think that's often the thing that holds a lot of people back, is that we don't know how it works. I think I've been in a church where they're always asking, we need new PCC members, and people aren't signing up to do it because they don't know what it means, and it just sounds a bit weird, and we've just got all these acronyms and confusing things. So I wonder whether there's a way that like there could be a session on for children or young people on how we make decisions in our church, and whether you could kind of look at all of those different decision-making opportunities and kind of think, how are children and young people involved in any of these, and if they're not, how could they be? Obviously that doesn't fully answer the question of like how do you do that, but I think there's lots of different ways of doing it. I've got some booklets that we've produced about how churches can support young leaders in their church, and there's quite a lot of ideas on how young people could be involved in decision making, and also just other opportunities for children and young people to share their voices. But obviously it kind of depends on the church and how the church works, because every church works differently, and they all kind of, have different committees, and, different denominations have different ways of functioning and all of those things. But
I think it's half a question, half a reflection. I've written it down and I'm trying to think how to incorporate it at our church. And you mentioned something about inviting the older youth along to like fellowship. I can't remember that's how we call it at ours. And I was like, fellowship is such an important, for me, it's how I've let growth within our faith beyond just our Sunday services or youth groups or the rest of it. And actually, I haven't come across many places doing that intergenerationally. And I thought about my own setting and thought, but I see absolutely no reason why not. I think it's like, well, why have we not done, I think sometimes, especially maybe not every, like if it's like a monthly thing or something, that come along. Because actually, anyone else, it's like sometimes fellowship groups, childcare is difficult for some people. Well, then why not bring them on? But when I've done that, it's then become like I've tried to involve people, but as everyone does, it's like the assumption that, oh, well, they'll just go play off on the side. There's absolutely no reason like that. I think we can all learn from each other.
I think following on what you said, Vanessa, you mentioned about this kind of like getting them involved in adult groups. I think it's really important because that transition into adulthood, obviously you guys now are part of the English community, part of a youth group, but in a couple of years' time you'll be obviously adults, and it's important to have that kind of transition into it so that you don't just suddenly kind of like leave the youth group and think, oh yeah, I'm not sure what to do now. So what I'd be interested to know, like, what for you guys, what do you see is kind of your next steps as you kind of like, when you become adults? Would you like to kind of get more involved in church leadership yourself, or start youth groups, or like what do you think you guys would like to do? Because as what you shared has been brilliant. It's really inspiring to hear from you guys, and it's good to hear young leaders kind of on your voice that. But yeah, I'd be interested to know kind of where you want to go in a few years' time.
I think for me, I just want to help people the way my church leaders have helped me, and I haven't been the best person in the past. Like, I've committed a lot of sin in my life, just like any other person has. And I feel like the church has kind of helped me to like turn away from that and become a better person. I just want to be that person for other people.
I feel called to go into ordained ministry, so I think that all the practice and experience that I can get now is really helpful for the future. But also just generally, like, the experience that you get, whatever you feel called to do in the future, is really helpful because it's all skills that you learn that are applicable to whatever job you end up doing.
So we've been thinking about culture, and this is great. It's great stuff to think about how our kind of churches work and what what can help young people and children lead in your church. But actually, some of it hasn't been very practical. So we are going to have an opportunity to think about that kind of practical side. How can we encourage children and young people to lead? What can we practically do to support children and young people as leaders and as individuals? And I've got, I think we've got a question for everybody, which you've got a question, Susannah.
Yeah. So can you think of the time when someone encouraged you as a leader, and why was it encouraging?
Any time in your life.
Yeah.
So I run the children ministry at our church, and coming from a secular job, like, my minister's really supportive. Like, any of the wacky ideas that I come out with, he doesn't go, oh, we're not doing that. He kind of goes, okay, and how would we make that happen? So I think that makes me feel a bit more confident in leading, and then being able to instill that in not only children and people but our volunteers as well. And I think that then it's like a golden thread, I guess, that it comes through me and then goes all the way through.
Sometimes all those things we said about listening to young people, actually sometimes as children and youth leaders, which I always feel, like I said about PCCs and all the rest of it. So I can feel very supported if I think somebody has really listened. And really listened to me. I thought about it, what the outcome of it is. If somebody says, I hear what you're saying, but that's not really a good idea, I live with that. But actually, or that's not what we want, or that doesn't work. But actually, listening goes both ways. And also just, for me, I will say, you know, you think, oh, I'm not being cringy, so I'm very sorry in advance, cringe alert. But we had a bit about why downstairs. So if someone says, oh, thank you so much, that was so helpful, or that you're natural at this, or any of those phrases, actually, that supports me in a different kind of way. I don't mean to boost my ear, but actually it goes, oh, I might just be on the right track. That's a different kind of support. So positive encouragement and being listened to.
I think for me, thinking back to when I was youth myself, it would be like confidence building. That I don't think I'm the most confident person now, but I definitely wasn't as a young child. And someone coming up and saying, like, I think you can do this, or getting behind me, and also having that safe space that after you have done something, so like the first time I shared a devotion, or the first time like I played an instrument, like knowing that it's a safe space, that, you know, if it doesn't quite go fantastic, that like, you know, you're so loved and appreciated by those people that are there, that it doesn't matter, it's like being with family.
I remember being asked to lead a session when I was about 14 with the youth group, in a small group, and I was quite taken aback to be asked. It was only leading a small part of it, but it was, I think the fact that my youth leader saw that potential in me was very encouraging. And I think that's helped me to see that how important it is to give young opportunities to lead and get involved with.
I remember being like 14, I think, in the church I went to, and they were holding a workshop about like reading, just reading Bible readings in church. And I remember being really surprised that I'd been invited to go to it, and thinking, oh, this isn't just the adults, this is young people as well. So just being kind of noticed and invited. But then actually I'm just thinking, I was never asked to read in church after that. So I remember the feeling was feeling like, oh yeah, I'm you know, being encouraged, but there was no follow-up. But, you know, obviously it's led to something, hasn't it? I remember the other thing I just wanted to share, I remember sitting once with like the minister and somebody else, and I'd had somebody had a right moment about me in the church. And so I was doing that, should I be, trying to play myself down a little bit, and they both just looked at me and Sophie, we need you. We need you, don't ever change, we need you. And just that feeling of two people just looking right at you and saying, no, it's you. That's just really validating. And I think that must be, as a young person to hear that, because of what you're talking about, like a self-confidence, just needing that boost. And don't be embarrassed about being cringe. But they could have held back.
I wasn't trying to embarrass everyone else, that's what it was.
They could have held back and just said, no, so they can honestly be, but they were really like heartfelt, like looking straight at me,
So how do you feel like you've been encouraged as young leaders?
So I actually focused on the people who've encouraged me, because people have a big impact. So first of all, my youth leader. I don't know if you guys actually know how much of an impact you have on young people's lives, but my youth leaders really encouraged me with giving me lots of opportunities and giving me really helpful feedback. And also, like at Bible study groups, just always being prepared to answer our existential questions, even if they're not related to the topic. It really helps. Next, the congregation of my church have been really helpful and encouraging, always saying well done after we've been involved in leadership, or just, being friendly to us after the services. It's been really encouraging, just to, have friendly faces staring back at you when you're on the stage, rather than 100 people that you don't really know. And also my granny, she is a preacher and her husband is also a preacher, so they've given me lots of helpful tips about like preaching and leading in churches. But my granny's also taught me a lot about theology and the Bible, especially from a really young age, which has been very influential to my faith. And also the diocese and people like Rachel and Mike have invited me to lots of events, which has been really helpful and really encouraging. So there are no set meetings or groups for young leaders in my church, and I think it'd be nice to have some of those. But incidentally, my Bible study group is becoming like that. For some reason, everyone in my Bible study group is involved in leadership in some way. And I think that even if you don't have a set group for young leaders, it can actually be helpful for people to interact with people of their age who are involved in leadership, so that they can see how other people are leading, and that will encourage them to lead as well. And another thing that I find really helpful in my church and just generally encouraging for faith is that our Bible study groups are sorted by usually age and gender. So it's normally people that you're friends with and people you feel comfortable with. So it means that we feel comfortable discussing difficult topics or sensitive topics, which are really important for growing in faith, especially being a teenager. It's such an important part of our development in our lives, and it helps to prepare us for what our lives will be like as adults.
I've had lots of encouragement from church leaders, parents and people in lots of different forms, and well, it's helped me because I'm up here talking about things like this with no fear, but if I were asked to do something like this at school, I would walk the other way. And I like to think that this is a result of all the support I've got from my church community. I mean, if I had to pick a particular person in my church who's encouraged me, it'd be a hard pick between my vicar and my curate. Don't let us go to your head, Sam. Both of which I look up to. And I really love the energy that they both bring, and I just want to help people the way they've helped me. I mean, my church and youth group have really helped me to grow into a young leader by being judgment-free, even when I've done wrong things. Like I said before, I've done a lot of wrong things, and that judgment-free environment has really helped me to become a better person, because I've always had a place where I can go and be supported without bias.
I think those things are really helpful, and I think it shows how your churches have been intentional about supporting and encouraging you as people, but also as leaders. And I think that kind of intentionality is something that is quite tricky in churches, because we're all busy, we all have lots going on, we all have lots of different programmes and rotas and lots of things happening, and it can feel a bit like an afterthought to support children and young people to lead when we've already got a lot of things on our plate. We've got sermons to write or meetings to go to or conversations to have with people. But I think it is really important for children and young people, just like any other leader, a young leader needs support. It's tempting to either have that kind of laid back approach and just hope everything will sort itself out, or to micromanage young people and children because we're terrified that they're going to make a mistake and it's going to ruin everything, or it's going to sort of destroy their self-confidence. And I don't think either of those are a helpful approach. If you're always told what to do, you're never going to know how to do it if you're stuck on your own at some point. But equally, if you're never given any support, you're either never going to do it, or you're going to feel really, really lost, and probably never want to do it again. So I do have a funny story. Well, I don't know if it's actually that funny, but I have a kind of, so several years ago I was part of a church not around here, so don't worry anyone. I was used to, and the church, I was a student worker, and the church really wanted to have more young adults and younger people involved in leading services and doing kind of sermons and doing prayers and intercessions and stuff up from the front at stage. as a student worker, I was also very passionate about this. 18 to kind of 30s were my remit, and I was looking after them. So I was like, yeah, this is great. The church leadership decided to kind of go ahead with this by choosing a list of young adults from the congregation and sticking them on a rota. This was in a kind of senior leadership meeting, so they were stuck on a rota. The rota was sent out, and about 5 or 6 of my young adults and students had an email saying, you're up to lead a service on the 20th of March. And as you can probably tell, this didn't go down very well. They hadn't been asked first, they hadn't been given any kind of support up until the day to do that, and actually several of those young adults who were very promising and gifted have not done it again because they don't want to, because they were put in a situation where they were not given enough support, and they weren't asked whether they even wanted to do it. So I'm sure none of you would do that. But just as a kind of warning against not kind of, often we have the best intentions, but we need to do the work as well. And I know it adds to our plates, but it's really important. So just a couple of kind of thoughts about what I think is helpful is to give regular support to young leaders. If you have a job, which you'll probably have regular catch-ups with a line manager or someone who supervises you. And we know that we can bring up problems in those meetings, and obviously you can bring up something sooner if it comes up. But actually, I think that kind of regular approach is really helpful for young leaders, for any kind of leader. If we're involved in leading something, we need to be able to ask them questions and feel like we're supported. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that kind of line management style, but I think having an open relationship that means that a young leader can ask a question if they need to is really important. So kind of this could happen with existing rhythms. It could be something before a church service, before a youth group, just after youth group, something like that. And I think one of those important things is you've both mentioned people who have really encouraged you. And I think having a kind of mentor type relationship with someone who's part of your church and who can support you and can answer questions or can kind of think on things if you need a sounding board as a leader is really, really key. If you've ever been to any Aurora training sessions, or if you have no idea what that is, I can kind of give you some answers about that. But actually, we have the Diocese of Sheffield have some training for children's and youth work, and in part of that is some training for mentors. So if you're thinking, yeah, this is really important, but who is going to be that kind of person to support our young leaders? We have some training that we can offer for mentors. But I think that kind of having that open communication, you've both mentioned people that you've spoken to, I think is really important, and being intentional about that. And I just have a couple of thoughts about what a good strategy, I suppose. I don't really like the word strategy, but a good strategy for how you could grow young leaders in your context. And I think the first thing with that is getting to know the children and young people in your church. Get to know them, what they're like, what they enjoy, and this can be a bit more difficult if you don't work directly with them. If you do work directly with them, you will already be doing this. But if you don't, do you have opportunities to maybe visit a children's group and join in and use the opportunity to ask the children or the young people questions? To kind of put it on not put it on them, but don't kind of barge in as I'm going to lead and take over the show, but actually you're going in there as someone who wants to find out more about what makes the children in your church tick. So is there an opportunity to do that? If you don't already have things like intergenerational gatherings, is there an opportunity for that, or do you go to them if they already exist? I know on a Thursday evening I would probably rather be in bed than going to a church event, but actually those things are where relationships and conversations are had and relationships form, and we learn more about each other. And if you have younger children in your context, get to know the parents. Obviously I am probably preaching to the choir for most of this, but these are just kind of things that sometimes we don't really think about, but actually could you get to know parents in your church? And kind of through that you can start to find out what kind of interests, skills, gifts, and all of those kind of personality, what the children and young people in your church are actually like. Children's groups and youth groups are amazing, but they are not the kind of be all and end all. Being part of a family is also really important. And from there, you can start to offer opportunities, so opportunities to lead. As I've mentioned, we've got this booklet here, which you are welcome to take as many copies as you want, which has some really good kind of ideas for what children and young people can do to lead in a church. These amazing young leaders also probably have like a lot of suggestions about what they've done or what they'd like to do, because sometimes what you've done and what you'd like to do might not be the same thing, but actually there are lots of different things, and I'm not going to go into a kind of list of what a child or a young person could do to lead, because we have lots of resources for that, and you're welcome to ask questions at the end. But I've got a couple of case studies from churches that I've spoken to that I think are doing this really well, about how they grow young leaders in their context. So one of those case studies it's actually from your church, Susannah. Susannah's youth worker organises this youth-led service once a month, is it once a month? Yeah, once a month. And I had a chat with him about how they do that. His first tip was start small with opportunities. So you know the young people or the children in your context best, but if a child or young person is not ready to do something that feels a bit daunting, don't force them to do that, because that is probably going to put them off and they never want to do it again. But things like kind of, could they have a little bit more responsibility to start with? Could they do something really simple like give out Bibles or welcome people into the church alongside a friend? Could they then maybe start to kind of deliver intercessions, do prayers alongside a friend if they don't feel confident doing that by themselves? Could they do something, and this is a bit groundbreaking, could they have their notes up with them just like I have now? Because I've been in places where you're told no notes, you just have to come up and deliver it yourself. I think it's okay to have notes, and actually, especially if a young leader has never done anything before, could they do something where they could have notes to do that? And he also makes sure that those young leaders have enough support. So it starts with a conversation with the young person, kind of sounding board, see if they want to actually do something. And then if they say they'll do it, he has prepared kind of instructions for how to do that opportunity, and how to prepare for that opportunity. And then finally, if it's something like preaching or leading, he then meets with them in a safe way and goes through it with them and asks them what they think is important to say in their opportunity, and they plan it together. Young leaders like Susannah don't need those kind of sit down and plan it together meetings, because you've done it loads of times. So as kind of young leaders get a bit more experience, they need less support, but actually you can always ask, which I think is really important, is having that open conversation. And another case study, which is very, very simple, from one leader. They host monthly services where children and young people are especially encouraged to lead things in church. And the very simple model is, you watch me, so the child or the young leader watches the leader whilst they do it, and then the young leader leads and is watched and supported by the adult leader, and then go ahead and do it. And that kind of like staged approach. So he put it as, you watch me, I do, you do, I watch you, you do. And that's obviously with an experienced leader supporting them. So yeah, I think those kind of key, like having stages and support is really important. And then finally, ongoing support, really important. It's important for a young person, for a young leader to be walking with someone as they do that, and having regular communication. Is there anything else that either of you would like to add to any of that? What would make you feel kind of able to lead? What support have you had? Something more that you'd like to add?
I don't know. I think it's important to say that young people quite often get stereotyped as immature and disrespectful. And I mean, there are a lot of people who aren't like. Even me, I like to have a joke with my friend, maybe the occasional 6'7". But
What does it mean?
But I'm sorry, Rach. But I still I'm still respectful. I know how to conduct myself properly, and the same applies for a lot of other young people. And I think it's just important to point that out. And I just want you to, like, if there was one thing I want you to take out of this, it's just to make sure you make young people feel like they're encouraged.
I think something that's really important to prepare children and young people for adulthood is talking about vocations. So a lot of young people at school, they get told, oh, what do you want to do in the future? What would you like to do? But actually it's about what God is calling us to do and what we're good at, because God has chosen us to do that. And it's especially difficult for young people if they feel like God might be calling them to do something, but maybe their parents or their school don't think that's a good idea. So just how to navigate that for young people can be really important in making decisions, because obviously young people have to make a lot of important decisions, whether that's the youngest ones choosing which high school to go to, or like the older ones choosing what degree to do and what job to go into, and all of it's going to have an impact on their future. And also, I know you probably know this, but it does need to be said, don't force young people to get involved in leadership. And also, if you know that there's a particular young person who just keeps saying yes and yes to everything, do they actually want to do it, or are they just saying it to be polite? Because a lot of young people feel like, especially if they don't have a lot of opportunities, if there is an opportunity, that they have to take it, even if they're not quite ready yet. So always having that support in place is really good, but also telling them that even if they're not ready now, there'll be another opportunity in the future, and helping them to prepare for that other opportunity.
Thank you. You guys have got you've got so much more as well, I think, to say, and so much wisdom, and unfortunately we do only have 10 minutes left. So I just kind of want to ask, has anyone got any questions? Has anyone? I've even got a slide. Oh, yeah. Any questions? For especially they're young leaders and they're leading, and they're young people and they know what it's like to be a young person as well. And I think they've got a lot to say about that, and a lot of helpful wisdom for us to learn from. So please ask them. Sorry for putting you on the spot there.
I'd like to hear your question answered about what it means. 6-7.
Oh, I don't know. What does it mean?
I don't even know where it came from. It's just.
I think it's the illustrious. I have a feeling it doesn't really have a.
We had to study this in my English language class. We did a full lesson on it, which was very awkward. But we came to the conclusion that it doesn't actually have a meaning, but it's more just sort of a way that you've symbolised that they're part of the group, and adults can't understand it as well.
I'm very sorry, I was kind of joking.
Any other questions?
I suppose I've got a question. We talked a lot about kind of based in churches. Youth work based in churches now. Like my oldest young person in my church is 12. And there's kind of this sort of assumed inevitability that they will stop coming when they're about 13. So that's kind of the general question about that. And also then, is it inevitable that I'm going to have to reach out to schools and other places, because it's this. I mean, I'm assuming you've got a youth group at your church, so that encourages other. How do you start? Or should you even be getting everybody expecting everybody to come to church? Because there's another model, isn't there, of going out of church and expecting people to become like us. So it's not really a question, is it?
There's a whole lot of questions.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the church, isn't it? And what the makeup of that church is. Like, if I think about the church that's down the road from me, they do a fantastic job doing children's ministry, but they do it through the week, or use Messy Church or whatever every other month or whatever. And I know other youth leaders that go into secondary schools and have a youth group and stuff like that. You've just got to find what works. But I guess it's trying it and seeing.
I guess also working with what you've got.
Yeah, because we had a children's and youth workers meet up, and one of them were talking about the fact that they don't have a lot of volunteers. So in terms of doing some of those things, they have to work it around the fact that they haven't got a lot of volunteers. So then you have to think about how you look at it in terms of that. And if you haven't got a youth worker, how do you do it with just volunteers there and stuff like that?
Another great way to get youth in church is just ask them to invite their friends, people that you already have. They can bring friends or siblings. So maybe you could have a separate group for people who maybe don't have as much faith or have any experience of faith, but that people can invite their friends to, and have a separate group for, like deeper Bible study and things like that. Because obviously young people do have friends, and it's a great way to, use the networks that the youth have as well.
Nice. As a young person, if you wanted to invite your friend who's not from a church background, what would you want to invite your friend to, in a way that they would not be completely out of depth?
I mean, probably my youth group, because that's not really like, we're going to sing this, we're going to pray for this. It's like, it makes you feel like, it's got lots of energy and it makes you feel good. So I feel like that could kind of be like a starting stone for someone. Because I mean, there's a saying that goes, a journey of 1,000,000 miles begins with one step. And I feel like that's kind of applicable in a scenario like this.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is your youth group, do you just do like games and socialising, or is there a part of it that is like a teaching?
I think it's like a mix of both, really.
Okay.
We play games, like, I think Sam knows how competitive the game of Scrabble can become. But yeah, there is worship. We do pray, learn about Bible stuff.
I guess my question would be, is there anything that you think your church could do, if you could change one thing or add something to the provision that your church provides for you guys, young leaders? Is there anything that's missing? Maybe there isn't, but have you got any thoughts of that you'd like to, if you could add something to your provision for youth? Particularly focus on, I guess, for young leaders, that kind of thing.
I think at the moment the only leadership opportunities young people have is in the specific designated youth services, and whilst that's a great way to practice, it's sort of like keeping children in a safe, contained bubble where things are allowed to go wrong, but young people also need to experience what it's like in other services and different formats. So obviously you probably can't get a young person to lead communion because they aren't qualified and things like that, but just getting young people to do maybe they could do a 5-minute talk or share their testimony or something at the main service, or they could do the intercessions or the reading or something like that. So obviously have the youth services that are designated for people to practice, but also just integrating it as a part of the church and as a part of the church community.
I've just been told we probably have a minute left,
yeah.
So you'll be around, won't you, for the rest of the day?
Yeah.
So if you think of any questions that you'd like to ask, please go and ask them. I'm just dropping you in there again, but you can run away if you're like, I don't know. But yeah, these are they're great. They've done loads of stuff. They're also part of the Young Leaders community, which if you have any young people at your church who want to get involved with leadership and are aged 10 to 18, that is a great place to start. It's kind of for 10 to 18-year-olds who are interested in leadership. We've got a gathering happening on the 25th of April, which is at Church House in Rotherham, and it's a time to for young leaders to gather together, to learn from each other, and also to hear something. So this one is based on vocation, so how God is calling us to be leaders. So we're going to have some input from the vocations, the Sheffield Diocese vocations team. It's ecumenical, so it's not just for Church of England young people, but if you have any young people at your churches who are in that age bracket who you think actually would love to encourage them to go along to that, please do encourage them. And we've also got these booklets which have had some input from some young people, including both of you. You don't know that, do you? But it's got some input from young people and also from church leaders about how you can grow young leaders in your context. It's got some it's based on different models, so it's not just all about how if you're part of a big church with lots of young people you can do this, but actually really simple. kind of starter things to start with, to see how you could start exploring young people in leadership. So please take those if you would like one. There's a couple of QR codes if you want to scan those. One of those is for the Aurora Children's and Youth Training, and the other one is for the Young Leaders community. And this is just some techniques for listening to children and young people from the Growing Faith Foundation. So as we kind of pack up, please feel free to scan those QR codes if you would be interested in any of those things. So yeah, I think one of you, we got like a goodbye. Yeah.
Thanks for coming, everyone, and it's been great to speak to you and listen to your questions, and just thanks.